At a time when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling to make ends meet, Joe is going to have to explain to the American people why he voted for a disastrous bankruptcy bill, which benefited the credit card companies.
Senator Biden, you voted for this bankruptcy bill. Senator Obama voted against it. Some people have said that mortgage holders really paid the price.
Well, mortgage holders didn't pay the price. Only 10% of the people who have been affected by this whole switch from Chapter 7 to Chapter 13.
Right now, what's in the news and what's being talked about a lot is the reform that Joe Biden really fought for, and this was the Bankruptcy Abuse Prevention and Consumer Protection Act. So this was something that Joe Biden really fought to get through. And really, when we look at this, we have to see who is on what side. So on one hand, we have Joe Biden and the credit card companies. So they're on the same team, and they worked so incredibly hard to get this bill passed. And they were people that really wanted to make sure that they stacked the cards in their favor. Of course, they're not trying to pass this bill to protect the consumers. They wanted to make sure that they did the complete opposite. That's why would a credit card company want to fight for the consumers, right? And then on the other hand, what you had was the unions, you had consumer protection groups, and you had the National Organization for Women. So you can see who's on what team. So Joe Biden, credit card companies, unions, consumer protection groups. And so these are the people, Joe Biden, consumer credit card companies for it. And then on the other hand, they were opposing it. And why would they oppose this bill, and why are they fighting for it? So really what this bill did, if you are somebody that has student loan debt, you can thank this act for basically taking away your right to file for bankruptcy and include your student loan debt in that.
In 2005, Senator Elizabeth Warren went to Washington to oppose a bankruptcy bill favored by the credit card companies. On the other side of the fight was Joe Biden. He was lined up with the banks, who were among the biggest industries in his home state of Delaware. Biden's side won that fight 15 years ago, and Warren says working families paid the price.
Let's talk about the bankruptcy bill. The bankruptcy bill was passing overwhelmingly, and I improved it. I had a choice. It was going to pass, a Republican president, Republican Congress, and I offered 2 amendments to make sure that people under $50,000 would not be affected, and women and children would go to the front of the line on alimony and support payments. That's what I did. It passed overwhelmingly.
Joe Biden backed bills to make it harder for Americans to reduce their student debt. David Sirota joins us now from the studios of Denver Open Media in Denver, Colorado. Hi, David. Just lay out Joe Biden's record on student debt and then go beyond.
Joe Biden has been working on bankruptcy legislation for the last 3 decades. He got into the Senate in the 1970s. He was on the Judiciary Committee. There began to be a push in the 1970s to reduce courts' ability to lower student debt in bankruptcy court. Starting in the 1970s. It started with government loans. There was a push in the 1970s to say that students would have to wait 5 years from graduating to be able to seek bankruptcy protections for their government loans. That was a bill that Joe Biden helped craft. He was on the conference committee. There was a series of other bills through the 1980s and into the 1990s in which Joe Biden worked on the same set of issues, lengthening the amount of time students would have to wait to be able to access bankruptcy protections for educational debt. And then, as you noted, into the late 1990s and the 2000s, there was this push by Biden. He was a key Democrat pushing the bankruptcy bill that was ultimately signed by President George W. Bush that eliminated the ability of most Americans to seek bankruptcy protections not only for their government loans, but also for their private student loans. So that was a big objective of the private lenders. At the time, over his career, Joe Biden has raised about $2 million from the financial sector while he's been sculpting these bills. And again, he played the key role throughout the last 3 decades in the Democratic Party, really in Congress, pushing these bills. Elizabeth Warren issued a paper when she wasn't in the Senate, when she was a professor, talking about how pivotal Joe Biden was in pushing these laws to, again, make it more difficult for students to reduce their student debt when they are in bankruptcy court. It really puts a prohibition on the judges themselves, saying you really can't lower student debt like you can most other forms of debt when you are in bankruptcy court.
This is a little bit about leadership as well. Joe talked about bankruptcy. Joe, if my memory is correct, you helped write that bankruptcy bill.
I did not.
On that bad bankruptcy bill that Joe now swears he barely had anything to do with, and he certainly didn't help write. Here is Republican Senator Orrin Hatch thanking Biden for helping to write the bill.
Senators Biden and Carper have worked tirelessly for years on this legislation, and they've taken some tough votes to get it done, and I admire them for it. You would expect senators from Delaware, which is the corporate state, to do their best to get this bill through, but they did.
There you go.
All right. And that bankruptcy bill, by the way, when we talk about education, we got 45 million people in America struggling with student debt, some of them really struggling with student debt. And that bankruptcy bill made it impossible, very difficult for people to escape from that student debt. It was a very, very bad bill. You said, Joe, that a majority of the people in the Senate voted for it. You're right.
Overwhelming majority.
Overwhelmingly. Well, I voted against it in the House, and I was right. And I don't have to rethink my position, because that's what leadership is about, having the guts to take an unpopular vote. But it's not just bankruptcy. The difference between Joe and I on higher education is 4 years ago. It was not a popular idea, Joe. I'm glad you're coming around now. 4 years ago, when I said that public colleges and universities should be tuition-free, people were saying, Bernie, that's a radical idea. Well, you got states and cities and counties all over the country that are moving in that direction.
Voting is so incredibly important, and a lot of times when we're talking about financial independence and financial success, we don't talk about voting and the importance of making sure that you go out and you ensure that the cards do not continue to get stacked against you, because that is what is happening to the working class in this country.
What leadership is about is going forward when it's not popular, when it's an idea that you get criticized for. So I'm proud of that fact, and I'm proud of my leadership on many issues.
Let's get something straight about the bankruptcy bill. The bankruptcy bill already, it did not affect student debt for 90% because the law had already been passed. You could not declare bankruptcy for those loans that were from private institutions. You couldn't do it. And so the bankruptcy bill didn't affect that. It affected 10% of the people, the first bankruptcy bill, 10% of the student loans, number one. Number two, now we're in a position where we're able to correct that problem.
Well, this is kind of circular logic. We're going to reform the bill that I voted for. Well, if you hadn't voted for it, and if you had rallied other people, as I try to do in the House voting against it, we might not have the problems with it we have today. You know, what leadership is about, Joe, and it deals with, you know, whether, you know, your opposition or your support, I should say, for legislation regarding gay communities and the so-called Defense of Marriage Act. You remember that bill, right? You remember the Defense of Marriage Act. It was, you know, gay marriage today is considered a little bit differently than it was 25 years ago. I remember that vote. It was a very hard vote. I voted against the Defense of Marriage Act. You voted for it. I voted against the bankruptcy bill. You voted for it. I voted against the war in Iraq, which was also a tough vote. You voted for it. I voted against disastrous trade agreements like NAFTA and PNTR with China, which cost this country over 4 million good-paying jobs. You voted for it. I voted against the Hyde Amendment, which denies low-income women the right to get an abortion. You have consistently voted for it. I don't know what your position is on it today, but you have consistently voted for it. In other words, all that I'm saying here, we can argue about the merits of the bill.
Vice President Biden.
It takes courage sometimes to vote, do the right thing.
Congress changed the law to make it harder for people to declare bankruptcy, and you fought at the time. I think that's the first time I ever talked to you, was you fought tooth and nail against that. Why did so many Democrats go south on the bankruptcy bill?
God, it was awful. Let me just say,
to explain my question, a lot of Democrats who in the eyes of Senator Warren, in the eyes of Ted Kennedy at the time, by the way, felt this bill was an outrage because it would make it really difficult for people who had legitimate, medical bankruptcies, for example. It would really put them in a hole. And yet the bill passed with an overwhelming majority. So that's what when I say go south, I'm expressing a value judgment, I confess. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, but this is the first fight in the book. I first start the personal story and then move to what I call the Bankruptcy Wars, because they lasted for 10 years. For 10 years. But this is where I was the eyewitness to what's broken in Washington. That basically the whole idea behind this law was a half a dozen credit card companies who were drawing in hundreds of millions of dollars in revenues and then in profits. And what they wanted is they figured out they were making money hand over fist. I mean, there's just no other way to describe this. They were borrowing low and lending high, and you could afford to take on a lot of people who had bad debts, to spend a lot of money on advertising and still take home incredible amounts of money. That was the business model. So what they figured out is where they were, the sweet spot and where they were making money were people who were in financial trouble. They weren't making money off people who can afford to pay their bills in full every month. They were making money off people who stumbled a little and then kind of would right themselves, and then would stumble a little more and right themselves. People who at a time when the banks could borrow the money for 4% were lending it out at 36%, and then fees on top of that were pushing the effective rates beyond that. So they look at their spreadsheets, their business model, and they say, but every year we have to write off some number of tens of millions of dollars for people who ultimately just collapse into bankruptcy. Now, they've already made plenty of money, and plenty of money actually usually off those people from the years that the people kept paying and paying and paying. But they figured out, if you could keep them out of bankruptcy, if you keep half of them out of bankruptcy, if you could get them to delay bankruptcy by 6 months and stumble and pay a little bit more, you get a little bit more money. Who knows? Maybe somebody will sell her wedding ring. Maybe somebody will go ahead and sell the family car. Maybe they'll borrow from grandma and ask for additional money. Other ways that they can shovel more money into the credit card companies. So the credit card companies came to Washington to change this law. And I thought, you gotta be kidding me. In a democracy, a handful of large financial institutions could never get a law changed that would hammer hundreds of thousands of middle-class families every year. You just couldn't get something like that passed. Well, when you've got an army of lobbyists on one side and people who have no lobbyists, have no voice, who don't want to stand up and identify themselves as people who file for bankruptcy, who don't want to picket, who don't want to organize, who do not want to be part of a group to say, yeah, I file for bankruptcy. No, they saw themselves as stupid, 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 and didn't want to be part of this. And what happens? Man, that bill was like it was on greased skids. It was going and it was going to pass. It had all the Republicans and a big chunk of Democrats behind it.
So why did the Democrats go?
Come on. I just described it. The lobbyists, the campaign contributions, the lawyers, they were all on one side. All on one side. And that becomes the first fight in the book. And this is what I'll say. 10 years I fought that fight. I fought that fight in Washington, and at the end of 10 years, I lost. I didn't lose, American families lost. The banks got exactly what they wanted, but I'll tell you this. I was never the same. I came out of that fight tougher and more determined and smarter than I had been going into it. For me, this becomes the opening place in the fight. It's where you make the decision. Are we really going to be a country that says we're just going to hand it over? And if you can get together enough lobbyists, if you can get together enough lawyers, if you can put enough money into the political process, then you get to write the rules. You get to write the rules that help the rich and the powerful. Or are we going to be a country that says, no, this country belongs to the people and we're going to take it back from those who do the lobbying?
Let's do something that is very rarely done in the Congress Let's do something that the media doesn't do. Let's talk about the reality of American life. Why is it that over the last 45 years, despite the huge increase in productivity and technology, the average worker today is not making a nickel more in real dollars? Why is it that over the last 30 years, the richest 1% have seen a $21 trillion increase in their wealth, bottom half of America, $900 billion decline in their wealth? Why is it that we are the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all people as a human right? Why are we the only major country not to have paid medical and family leave? Why do we give tax breaks to billionaires when 500,000 people are homeless today? And it comes down to something, Jake, we don't talk about. The power structure in America. Who has the power? And I'll tell you who has the power. It's the people who contribute money, the billionaires who contribute money to political campaigns, who control the legislative agenda. Those people have the power. And if you want to make real changes in this country, if you want to create an economy that works for all, not just a few, if you want to guarantee quality health care to all, not make $100 billion in profit for the healthcare industry, you know what you need? You need to take on Wall Street. You need to take on the drug companies and the insurance companies and the fossil fuel industry. You don't take campaign contributions from them. You take them on and create an economy that works for all.
Some pundits in the Democratic establishment are panicking about the possibility that he might be the Democratic nominee.
He's been the candidate who's been able to demonstrate the broadest coalition to date.
There's a lot of pain in this country that doesn't get talked about enough. And he speaks to that over and over and over again.
As you may have noticed lately, the establishment's getting a little bit nervous. Oh my God, they're putting together a multi-generational, multi-racial movement of millions of people. Oh my goodness, how can we stop them?
Senator Bernie Sanders says his campaign raked in over $46 million in February.
That's grassroots. That's the opposite of a billionaire-backed campaign. You need to have a multiracial coalition in the diverse, heterogeneous Democratic Party of the 21st century. Bernie Sanders is the only candidate who is checking all of those boxes.
He's got an extraordinary organization, and he's got incredible enthusiasm.
So they're getting nervous, but you know what? When we stand up together, they ain't gonna stop us.
Is Congress really so corrupt that Wall Street calls the shots? The short answer is yes. Congress really is so corrupt and Wall Street really does call the shots.
Follow the money. Right now, it's perfectly legal to buy political influence in America. Here's how it works. Let's say a big bank wants a law that would force taxpayers to bail them out again if they repeat the exact same reckless behavior that crashed the global economy in 2008. Not exactly the most popular idea with the public, and Congress knows that. That should be the end of it. But that's where the money comes in. It's perfectly legal for our bank to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job is to make sure that the government gives the bank what it wants. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help raise a ton of money for their re-election campaigns. It's perfectly legal for those lobbyists to offer those same politicians million-dollar jobs at their lobbying firm. Then, those lobbyists can literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and hand it off to the politician they just buttered up with campaign money and lucrative job offers. And it's perfectly legal for those politicians to take the lobbyist-written language and sneak it through Congress at the last second. So now you've got a law that greatly benefits the banks and the whole process can start over. This is how a bill becomes a law. A special interest hires some lobbyists, those lobbyists collect campaign contributions, offer jobs, and then write the laws that Congress then passes to help those same special interests. This happens every day on every single issue with politicians of both parties. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. And that's trillion, with a T. And that's just the top 200 companies. Never mind every other special interest, every union, every trade association, and every billionaire. Every single one of them can use their money to buy political influence. You know, there's this idea out there that this only became a problem after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. But the data goes back almost 40 years, and the results are clear. Corruption is legal in America. And as long as it is, anyone who can spend money to buy political influence will. The solution here isn't rocket science. Make corruption illegal.
The idea that this is Bernie's implication is somehow I'm being funded by millionaires.
Why don't you get rid of the super PAC that you have right now, which is running very ugly negative ads about me, by the way. Don't laugh, Joe. That's just the truth. And they got 2 other super PACs running ads against us. Why don't you just say right now, go on television and say, hey, you know what? I think in the past, Joe, if I'm not mistaken, you condemned super PACs. Is that correct?
You get rid of the 9 super PACs you have?
I don't have 9 super. I don't have any super
9.
PACs.
You want me to list them?
No. Yeah, you go ahead. List them.
Okay, come on. Give me a break.
No, I won't give you a break on this one, Joe. You condemned super PACs. You got a super PAC is running negative. But here's the point. This is the point. In the richest country in the history of the world, half of our people should not be struggling to put food on the table. And the reason for that is you have a political structure in which big money interests not only dominate the political system, but dominate our economy as well. Somebody makes a decision, we're going to shut down a factory in America, we're going to move to China, we're going to move to Mexico, pay people starvation wages there. This is an issue that has got to be ultimately dealt with. Who has the power in America? Are we content with so few exercising so much power when so many people have given up on the political process?
The system is corrupted by big corporations who think that they can buy an election. Bernie is supported by regular working people who put just $1 or $2 in. He doesn't put his finger up in the air and try to figure out which way the polls are blowing. He just fights for what he believes in. This is a man who understands what's going to take to actually move these ideas forward, and I trust him to fight for all of us in spite of it being hard.
America is drowning in student debt like never before.
This year, student loan debt reached an all-time high of $1.4 trillion.
Nearly 70% of students had to take out loans to make it through college. On average, each student graduated about $30,000 in debt.
One of the things that makes student loan debt such a drag on the economy is that it's so hard to get rid of.
If we could bail out Wall Street, we sure as hell can reduce student debt in this country.
I owe $57,000. $58,000 in student debt.
I've got over $32,000.
I'm not even quite sure how much I owe in student debt. It's gotten to the point where it's almost scary to look at.
It's crippling an entire generation of people. It's just not right. This is like America. We have the right to like these huge big dreams, you know, the picket fence, the house, and that's just not what our current system allows.
Part of what people look for when they come from their home countries, like my family did, is an opportunity to get an education. That's what my father came here for.
My daughter's 7. I haven't been able to really save anything meaningful for her, and you know she's going to be in college in 11 years, and I don't foresee you having the money to help her in any certain way.
I feel like a huge failure seeing this massive number that I know will take 30, 40, 50 years to eliminate. I have a long-term boyfriend. We're celebrating 3 years together, and he doesn't have any student debt, but I have so much, and I have to think about how that will affect him. Once you're married, that's your joint loan. You're both screwed and on the hook.
If I didn't have this amount of debt, I'd definitely be done with school by now.
If you have to get at least 4 years of higher education to be a functioning person in society to get by, like, you shouldn't be expected to take out 6 figures and pay that back. It should be a right.
We just get told you're too young, you don't know what you're talking about, oh, you're just being greedy, you're entitled. And to have a senator that's on our side and making policy and proposing the bold changes that we need, it just gives me so much hope and is such an inspiration. It doesn't have to be like this. We collectively can say this is not how we want our young people to grow in this nation. This stifles innovation, entrepreneurship, just basic intelligence and self-betterment in our country. We're not going to do it anymore. It's bad for the economy and it's bad for us.
There are other countries that have done this, so why can't we not do the same?
Bankruptcy is really there for people who don't have a choice, who, fall on hard times, they have hardships, they have some sort of emergency that happens, and especially in today's environment. I mean, literally people are being bankrupt because of medical bills. I mean, we are a country that does not guarantee healthcare as a right, and that causes people to face some really hard times. And when the choice is either death or life, people are going to obviously choose life, and they're going to try to use whatever means they have. And sometimes they have to take out credit card debt, loans, whatever it may be, or the medical debt continues to pile up, and they have no choice but to file for bankruptcy. So bankruptcy laws are really there to protect consumers. And I don't think it's people being irresponsible, especially when you look at 2008. In 2008, it was shown that there were certain financial companies that were targeting minorities, that didn't really understand the loan process. They didn't understand certain language. And what happened was they were targeting these people because they knew that they could scam them into taking out these subprime mortgages. So it's been shown that these companies are targeting these groups of people. So of course we need bankruptcy laws to protect them. So if you do find yourself in a situation where you faced a hardship, or you got scammed, or something happened, you just had some bad luck, you should be able to discharge that debt, so that way it's not crippling you. But no, Joe Biden comes along and says, absolutely not. We got to protect the credit card companies.
66.5% of all bankruptcies here in the United States are due to medical costs and medical procedures that cause people to miss work. They end up in bankruptcy. 66.5% of all bankruptcies related to some kind of healthcare cost. Over 500,000 people per year in this country are filing for bankruptcy. I think it's 550,000 people filing for bankruptcy because of medical costs. We have the worst healthcare in the world. Maybe not statistically, although we are actually close to the bottom. But personally, I can tell you that because it sucks. Everything about the American healthcare system today sucks. This is why things like Medicare for All are so important. This is why policies and proposals to lower prescription drug prices, to rein in the cost of medical procedures and doctor's appointments and everything like that. That is why that is so important. I can only speak from personal experience, but I can also look at the statistics and realize that I'm not alone. I may not even be in the minority on this at this point, folks, because I know a lot of people watching this right now can relate to everything that I have said. And that is why this Democratic primary is so important. There is no way in hell I would ever throw my support behind any candidate who does not 100% support Medicare for all. This has to be a plan and a policy that covers every single person in this country, to where none of them ever have to worry about going into bankruptcy or missing a dose because they can't afford it. Anything short of that is 100% unacceptable.
All of you are aware that I'm doing everything that I can, having introduced in the Senate the Medicare for All legislation that finally will do what every other major country on earth does, and that is guarantee health care to all people as a human right. And I want you to know what that means. It means that we do and expand upon what they do in Canada, and that is you go to any doctor you want, you go to any hospital you want, but you don't have to take out your wallet, you don't have to take out your credit card. And if you have a serious illness, there are zero expenses. That's it. And to my mind, that is what healthcare in a democratic, civilized society is supposed to be about. Everybody gets the healthcare they need, and it's paid for out of the general tax base, and nobody has any medical debt. That's what we are striving for. So we are making good progress on that. I think all over the country, more and more people are coming on board that effort. We're taking on the healthcare industry, by the way, which made $100 billion in profits last year. We're taking on the pharmaceutical industry, which, as you know, charges us by far the highest prices in the world. And these guys who are making huge profits, they love the current system. They think it's great. Most Americans don't. But we're going to have to take them on. They're already advertising here in Iowa, et cetera, et cetera. But we're going to do something else. As president, what we are going to do is cancel the $81 billion in past due medical debt in this country. And we're going to roll back the disastrous bankruptcy reform bill that made it harder for millions of Americans to discharge medical debt after a debilitating illness.
It just blows my mind that this information is out there. We live in an environment where you can Google it. I mean, it is fact that Joe Biden stood against the working class people right before the last recession and helped champion this bill. And this is something that got passed. So you can thank Joe Biden for the student loan debt crisis alone. I mean, $1.5 trillion. People are crippled, and this is something that's crippling our economy. And because people aren't buying houses, they're not buying stuff that is necessary to continue to grow the economy, because the student loan debt crisis is literally crippling the economy. So, it's interesting to me that we have people who actually think Joe Biden is fighting for the working class when bills like this acts like this continue to show that he's not fighting for the working class. He's on the side of the credit card companies. This is really a great example of why I say it is so incredibly important to go out there and vote. Who fights on your behalf? We got to start voting people in that fight on our behalf, that are not funded by corporations. There are people that are funded by small dollar donations. That's the people that are going to fight for you, because they know that when they're up for re-election, you are going to be funding them. It's very simple, guys. And when we use our voting to make sure that we do not continue to see the middle class basically disappear, we're going to be much more prosperous.
Welcome back to the CNN Univision Democratic presidential debate. Finally, gentlemen, thanks so much for everything. As we end here tonight, let's return to where we began, the coronavirus, which does not discriminate based on ideology. It does not care if one is a Democrat or a Republican, a conservative, a moderate, or a progressive. Senator Sanders, let me start with you. What's your closing message tonight for those who are concerned about, affected by, or dealing with the coronavirus?
Well, our hearts go out to everyone. We need to move aggressively to make sure that every person in this country who has the virus, who thinks they have the virus, understands they get all the health care that they need because they are Americans, that we move aggressively to make sure that the test kits are out there, that the ventilators are out there, that the ICU units are out there, that the medical personnel are out there. But Jake, if I might also say that in this moment of economic uncertainty, in addition to the coronavirus, it is time to ask how we get to where we are. Not only our lack of preparation for the virus, but how we end up with an economy where so many of our people are hurting at a time of massive income and wealth inequality. It is time to ask the question of where the power is in America. Who owns the media? Who owns the economy? Who owns the legislative process? Why do we give tax breaks to billionaires and not raise the minimum wage? Why do we pump up the oil industry while 500,000 people are homeless in America? This is a time to move aggressively, dealing with the coronavirus crisis, to deal with the economic fallout, but it is also a time to rethink America and create a country where we care about each other rather than a nation of greed and corruption, which is what is taking place among the corporate elite. This is an outline of proposals that I will be introducing to the Senate leadership and working with the Democratic leadership to implement. But it is important for me to hear your comments We will have this outline up tomorrow in a little bit clearer way on our website, berniesanders.com. And in addition to that, we need to know what you are experiencing right now. It's hard to write proper legislation if we are not familiar with the kinds of pain and problems that people all across this country are facing. So let me just conclude by once again thanking all of you for being with us tonight, to understand that what this country is experiencing right now is something that we have never experienced in the modern history of this country. That is, number one, a major pandemic, which threatens the health and lives of millions of our people. And on top of that, an economic crisis which threatens the jobs and the income of many, many, many millions of people. So we got some major crises, but I have the strong belief that if we work together, if we do not turn to fear and panic, but if we understand that the way we solve this is by going forward as one people, remembering those who are hurting tonight and will be hurting in the future. This is the richest country in the history of the world. This is a country with unbelievable energy, with unbelievable talent, with incredible resources. We can do it. We can address this crisis. We can minimize the pain, and let us do just that. So let us go forward together, and I look forward to continuing to communicate with you, to tell you where we are coming from, what our ideas are, and look forward to hearing from you as to what your ideas are and what your situation is. In this time of crisis, when we're living in a really, really unsettling world, economically, from a healthcare perspective with the coronavirus, the people of America know my record, okay? For 30 years, I have stood with the working families of this country. I have taken on every special interest there is out there, and that is what I will do in the White House. That's a very different record than Joe's.
That is not a different record than mine.
That is a totally different record than yours, all right? I mean, and it's manifested in this campaign when you're, getting all this money from, wealthy people and billionaires. So I think if you want somebody who will take to the White House what I've done for my whole life.
Thank you, Senator Sanders.
And that is take on special interest. I think I'm that candidate.
I keep hearing this thing about Joe Biden being a safe candidate. Safe for who? I know he goes to corporate fundraisers and tells people that nothing's going to change, so he's clearly telling them that he's a safe candidate for them.
The market seems to be happier facing a Biden prospect than a Sanders prospect.
American investors are very happy with Joe Biden.
What's safe for the ultra-rich is incredibly dangerous for everybody else. Policies that don't challenge the status quo right now are incredibly dangerous. They are dangerous to our planet because what scientists have told us is that we have waited and procrastinated for so long in the face of the climate crisis that only transformational change will keep us safe. Bernie Sanders is the only candidate whose policies are bold enough to actually keep us safe, whether it is Medicare for all or his transformational Green New Deal. Bernie Sanders is not a risky candidate against Donald Trump. He is in fact the safest candidate because it is only somebody who is able to draw that sharpest of contrasts with everything that the Trump administration represents, who is actually going to be able to expose Donald Trump for who and what he is.
If your car's in a ditch, you don't want the driver who thinks that we should take the same path that's got us in the ditch. You want a new driver who's got a better sense of direction.
Living in a family that struggled economically powerfully influenced my life and my values.
Bernie Sanders, fighting to raise wages for American workers, leading the fight to guarantee health care for all, standing up for civil rights, seniors, veterans, and our children's future. Whether it was Wall Street, the drug companies, or other powerful special interests, Bernie has taken them on for us. Now, our country is at a turning point, a dangerous demagogue tearing our nation apart, hard-working people betrayed by Trump, a healthcare system that makes enormous profits for drug and insurance companies, and a planet on the brink of a climate disaster. In this moment, we need a fighter, Bernie Sanders. We know he'll fight for us as president because he always has.
I'm Bernie Sanders, and I approve this message. Thank you all. Thank you all very much.